You're listening to the Second Look Podcast, where we take a closer look at what we're learning each Sunday at Connection Church to help you grow in your walk with Christ. Here are your hosts, Pastor Joe Terreri and Pastor Dan DeRochers.
Welcome to The Second Look. My name is Dan.
And I'm Joe.
And we're here talking about one great life.
Yes.
But first, hey, Joe.
Hey, Dan.
I have a question for you, as I always do.
Not shocked.
Joe, what is something that you have done to improve your life?
Well, I mean, the most recent example, and everyone loves when people start hear someone talk about their diet.
Especially in January.
But the most recent thing I've done to improve my life is I've started something called Noom, N-O-O-M. And I didn't know you were going to ask this question, so this was not a setup. But yeah, my wife and I are on this thing called Noom, and it's a weight loss program, and it's going great. And I actually love it.
Two questions about Noom.
Yeah.
Number one, do you
Not
have
Moon.
Do you have
Noom.
well, it's the inverse of,
Yes.
of Moon. Do
Yes.
you have an affiliate link? Is that what we're going to drop that in the chat?
If I can get 27 of our listeners to sign up for Noom, Cheryl and I get a free trip to Hawaii.
That was my second question. Is it an MLM?
No, it's not a multi-level. It's not multi-level marketing. It is simply you buy this app, which basically you have to do your Noom devotions every day. You have to read these articles. You have to weigh yourself every morning. Cheryl and I have already bought a new scale because we couldn't read the numbers on our old scale, so we got a digital one, which feels a bit more generous than our previous scale, and maybe just because we can see the numbers.
Right.
And then you count all your calories, and it's going great. And I would highly recommend it if you're trying to lose weight. And I gain nothing. By the way, there's no
I hope
referral
you don't gain
code.
anything. I
Although
hope you
if
lose.
I do send you a referral code, wait a minute. If I do send someone a referral, I get a $20 Amazon gift card. So if you love your pastor, you're going to email me and I'll recommend you. Thank you.
Wow.
You know, Dan, I want to tell you a story. I was having lunch with one of our listeners the other day. By the way, it's not a normal thing for me to just have lunch with listeners, but if you ask me, I might go. So anyway, I was having lunch with one of our listeners. His name's Dan. Dan's an awesome guy. Him and his wife go to our church. And he was saying, he goes, I love this podcast. He goes, but I notice you don't have any sponsors. And then he goes, because you don't have any sponsors, I want to pay for lunch. And I'm like, wow. And so I had a salad. And so I feel like that's a fringe benefit of this podcast, Dan. So that's another thing I've started. I've started to try to see if I could use the Second Look podcast to get free lunches.
And yet here I am, one half of this podcast. It does say with Joe and Dan.
But Dan, let's be honest. My name is first for a reason.
Okay, yeah, I got it. And
I want to say I'm totally joking about that. Dan is actually always carrying the podcast.
and today's podcast is with Joe and Dan and John.
Yes, and John.
The Baptist. Who we talked about yesterday. I thought that was such an interesting thing. And, you know, we read about John the Baptist. He's got some weird quirks.
Yep.
And his whole mission was not about himself, right? It was to prepare the way for Jesus.
Yes. Yeah. John is a unique guy, and for whatever reason, he got on my radar, and just this message, I just felt it was from the Lord. Like, I sometimes we go through series and I just kind of follow passage by passage, and that's what we normally do. But for these first couple weeks of the year, I've just been kind of just saying, Lord, what do you want to say this week? And I do believe God speaks through series, so I don't want to get into any kind of weirdness, but it just was cool. And so I felt like this message was really from the Lord for our church. And it just really ministered to me personally. And John's life, it's a difficult life. What we didn't talk about yesterday is his birth is in some ways miraculous because his mom, Elizabeth, couldn't have children, and he was born to parents of old age. And then John was actually, what I didn't cover either is when Mary and Elizabeth, Mary, Jesus' mom, and Elizabeth, John's mom, were together. John had already been in utero for 6 months, and when Mary walked into the room pregnant with Jesus, Luke tells us in his gospel that John leapt in her womb. Like, John was the first one to know from a human perspective, this child in the womb of Mary is special, and John's whole life was about preparing the world. We don't know how Mary and Elizabeth were related, but Jesus and John were related somehow. We didn't want to get into the weeds of that yesterday. But that's just such a cool life that John lived. And yet ended quite tragically.
It did. And, his ministry was not to attract followers,
Yes.
right? But to prepare the way for Jesus. And I actually think this is an interesting time in the history of our church to have a message like this, as we are currently experiencing some pretty incredible growth right now. And I mean, we know this here. Maybe not everybody would know this just looking at Connection Church on the surface, but like, we are not at all interested in the fame or the organization of Connection Church.
Yeah.
We really exist to point people to Jesus.
Yeah, that was all over my mind yesterday, because I think that it's easy for when church life is your work, it's easy for you to slip into this mode where you want to make a name for yourself. And I feel like that's not really what I sense around me, or even in me, to be honest. I have other issues for sure. But I was even thinking yesterday, it's like, yes, like Connection Church can become what God wants it to become, but no matter what it becomes, it always needs to be about Christ becoming the greatest.
Yeah.
And because here's the truth, Dan, we're going to have a last day as a church.
Yeah.
I mean, if you read the New Testament, there's all these letters to all these different churches. Guess how many of them are still around? Zero.
Yeah.
And so it's never about, like, the church is eternal, but the local church has a life cycle.
Yeah.
And so we're in a wonderful time in our life cycle, and we all hope that this church will last hundreds of years into the future and outlast all of us. But it's not about the Connection Church brand.
Right.
It's about Jesus Christ. And so I believe that every Christian, every pastor, every church needs to adopt the John the Baptist mindset about Jesus Christ. He becomes greater, we become less. We have our season. How are we going to use our season? We are going to use our season to make Christ great in our hearts and minds. Not that we're adding to his greatness, but we're lifting him up as the great one.
So I want to talk about him becoming greater and us becoming less. One thing that I found just interesting, and I would love to know your thoughts on this, is with John the Baptist, right? As Jesus is becoming the focus.
Yes.
So John is in ministry.
Yeah.
He's baptizing people.
He's famous.
He's famous.
Yep.
Jesus starts to become the focus, and he's fading into the background. John is then filled with satisfying joy. But I'm just thinking, like, this is an actual person. Like, he's actually being eclipsed.
That's good.
Inside of, like, it's a person. Like, how many of us in our work, in our friendships, in our social circles would be filled with joy when
in our churches
when someone arrives who eclipses us and kind of pushes us into obscurity?
Yeah.
How hard would that have been for John?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard, but I think on a human level, maybe not even on a human level, on a spiritual level, if it's Christ who's taking up the glory, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But for a lot of us, we get into vain conceit and rivalry is because we still think we're great. And this is where politics happen. This is where egos get wounded. This is where we get offended. It's because we're always trying to, we keep seeing life as this great schematic of who has the most power and who's the most important. And I think we all fall into that. And not that organizations don't need structure and authority and all that chain of command, all that's important. But when it's Jesus, when it is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world that's eclipsing you, I mean, Dan, I can confidently say that should be the driving mission of all of our life.
Yeah.
And I also think on a practical level, maybe to answer your question, I think for all of us who have ministry positions, whether we are paid to do ministry or we volunteer to do ministry, there should actually be great joy in us understanding that we have a time, we have a season to serve. We steward an office, we steward influence, we steward a ministry, but there's a last day to that.
Yeah.
And that's really what I was trying to drive towards at the end of my message. Like we're all going in the box.
Yeah.
And I don't ever say that to be morbid or to be depressing. It's just a fact. Like, we have a last day. And I would say if people don't like to think about death, what you're really saying is you don't like to live in reality. Now, I'm not saying we should think about death all the time. And of course, death is incredibly painful. And it's not like I spend all my days thinking about death. But there has to be this sense in all of our hearts that things are going to wind down.
Yeah.
And so many of us will have John's experience. We will live our life, and then we will go into obscurity, forgotten, and die in isolation. Like, maybe with our family surrounding us. And I think when we understand where that's where life is headed, it actually allows us not to hang on so tightly to our position, to our roles, to our influence, to our fame, to our ego. It actually allows us to say, like, no, I'm here for a season. Like, here's what's true about you, and here's what's true about me. We are like the grass. We spring up in the morning, and then by evening, we're withered. Like, there is a season for us, and that's why we need to live wise lives, because Jesus has to be greater, because we're not enduring. Christ is. Yeah. And that's what we want people to latch on to. Christ, not Connection Church. Even though we love Connection Church, our goal is that people would know and love Jesus.
What does it look like for Jesus to become greater and for us to become less?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. And I don't know if I have a great answer for that, because I think that's going to look different in each of our lives. But I think some practical things, like just in terms of John the Baptist's life, is really not needing everyone's affirmation to know who we are. Like, I think for some of us, we are so glued to our phones and social media is because we keep asking for others to affirm us and tell us who we are. And I think the way that Jesus becomes greater is that his word about who we are is enough for us.
Yeah.
I think another way, and I want to be careful here, but I actually think in the ways in which we dress, I actually think we need to be really honest about if we're trying to draw attention to ourselves. And I'm not talking about the modesty thing with women. Like, that's not actually my application here. Like, when I think about how John dressed, I'm not saying we should get the camel hair and the leather belts out.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank the Lord. But I do think there's a difference between wanting to look nice and wanting people to think you look great. And listen, I'm not against fashion, I'm not against dressing well, but I just think there's these things where we need to be asking ourselves, like, why? Why am I posting that picture of myself in a swimsuit on Facebook? Why does the whole world need to know that I was at this really great party with beautiful people? Like, why do people need to know that I got this new car? Why do people need to know that I live in this great house? Why do people need to know that this is my girlfriend and look how pretty she is? Like, I think there's just this sense where we can inadvertently not understand our own motives, and we're always like there could be some attention grabbing ways we're trying to live our life so that in people's minds we're elevating the self. And I think we do this with our politics. Like, look whose team I'm on. Look whose tribe I'm on. I'm on the side of truth. I'm on the side of this guy who's going to save America. And so I think it's like, we want to always associate ourselves with winners. We want to present ourselves in a certain way. We always want to be done up. We always want people to think highly of us. And I'm not saying we should make our goal to make people think we're scum. But what I do think is one way we can become less is by examining our motives and saying, why do people need to know this about me? What am I trying to gain? And that's when it's really like, no, I think the way of making Jesus greater is the way of self-forgetfulness. And again, I'm not an anti-social media guy. I'm not an anti-dressing nice guy. I'm not an anti-having a pretty spouse guy. I'm not anti-having good cars and a nice house. It's just, why does the world need to know how successful I am? Why does the world need to know how beautiful I am? Why does the world need to know how good I look in a bathing suit? Like, honestly, that's where the greatness issues, I think, happen for a lot of us.
Do you think that maybe the satisfaction that we feel from presenting ourselves that way? Because I can imagine, like, some of that's probably unspoken.
Yeah.
And it's, like you said, it's more about motive
Yeah.
than it is about the actual, like, well, in order for Jesus to become greater, you become less. Don't do this, don't do that, and do this. It's more about the condition of our heart. And do you think that the satisfaction derived from feeling good about ourselves is fleeting? Like, how do you think it...
No, I think it's wonderful to feel good about yourself. I feel good about myself. I mean, I hope you feel good about who you are. I mean, I know I have a lot of things to work on, but I think the question is who do I celebrate that with? Like, so,
Okay, that's
like,
good.
like, okay, so I'm on this diet and I'm, things are going well. It's like, who am I celebrating with? I don't need the whole world to know how it's going. I want Cheryl
have
to
brought it up on this
I know, I
podcast.
should have brought it up. We'll have to edit it. This is just bear with me, folks, okay? I'm trying, but just hear me. So I just think we celebrate who we are with those we know and love without getting even needing this constant zone of affirmation. But we all need encouragement and affirmation.
Yeah.
My question is where are we going for it?
Yeah.
Like even with our bodies, like let's make this real. Like even for me, like I want to serve God for as long as I can, so I know I need my body to be healthy.
Yeah.
That's not about my vanity.
Sure.
That's got to be about Christ's glory. And of course,
Yeah.
there's physical benefits to me. But I think that's where we have to go. And I think the real issue here is identity. Like some of us, we get into shameless self-promotion. We get into these sideways motives about people needing to affirm us is because we're trying to build our identity there when Jesus is inviting us to just let his affirmation be enough. And of course we need friends and loved ones to affirm us, but we don't need everyone to affirm us. And we don't need everyone to know what we're doing. And so I really think that it is not wrong to feel good about yourself. It is wrong for everyone in the world to need to tell you that you're great. Like, here's my point. God's voice needs to be enough for you.
Yeah.
Being a son or a daughter of the Most High God because of your faith in Jesus Christ, being adopted into the family, like that's actually the beginning place of Jesus becoming greater and you becoming less. It's actually like, it's not self-esteem is bad. It's where are you getting your self-esteem from? Your self-madeness or your acceptance from the Father? And when we're accepted by the Father, when we know who we are in Christ, we don't need the whole world to know who we are. Because that's enough. And that's where I think the starting place of Jesus becoming greater and us becoming less really begins.
Do you think that finding our identity in Christ and embracing that helps us to navigate through the different seasons of life when we transition from being young to being middle-aged or old, or even things in our career or family changes? Thinking about people, I talked to somebody yesterday who is like a year from being an empty nester and doesn't know what that's going to look like for her.
Absolutely. I think those are the most important times to know who you are. Because we're all fading. Like, that's the thing. Like, I mean, here's what I know about my life, just to speak real personally. I think I am as most people describe as entering the prime of my life. I'm not a rookie anymore. I'm not like just trying to figure things out. I'm into my 40s and 50s and your early 60s. Like you can have a lot of influence and a lot of impact. But here's what I know. There's 22, 23, 25 years in front of me if God gives me life.
Yep, good.
And then there's a fade. Then there's the institutional leadership is no longer my calling. There's handing over the reins. There's not congregations to preach to every weekend. Like, and I'm not saying you have to stop preaching when you're 60. I think my point is we need to know now that we have a season, and we need to tell ourselves the truth about right now. This is my season, but I'm going to give it away someday. And I think that's where people get stuck and they get confused, is thinking it's always going to be how it is. And then people turn 80 and they're like, oh gosh, my life doesn't matter anymore. It's like, no, it's not that your life doesn't matter anymore. You're just in a different season. And isn't it great that the seasons when you're 70 and 80 aren't the same when you're 40 and 50? You have less energy, but it doesn't mean that God's done using you.
Yeah.
It just means you're in a different season. And so your identity doesn't need to collapse when you walk away from one season and you enter the next. Like, yes, of course you're still a mom when you're an empty nester, but you're not in the same season.
Yeah.
And it's good to be honest with yourself that every season changes. And that doesn't mean it gets easy, But I think sometimes we don't see life coming. And here's where everyone's life goes, through all the seasons, and then you die. So just be honest about the seasons you're going to go through.
Yeah.
And it's sad, and you should grieve, and hear me, please. You should grieve the loss of seasons. Like, it is not wrong to be sad. It is not wrong to like, I mean, my goodness, like I'm a few years away from sending my oldest off to college. Like, that's sad. But it's what God wants. It's like he's got to go and have his season. And so it's like, that's my role, to launch him, to prepare him. And so, yes, there's grief, but it's also like how God has designed us. And then the other thing, Dan, is like these 70 or 80 years, as Moses puts it, that we get, like, it's just scratching the surface of what is to come for those who love God. Like, yes, it brings tears to my eyes now, but I'll laugh at myself in 180 years thinking like, oh my gosh, like life with Jesus and eternity and those I love who love the Lord. It's like I'm going to look and be like, yes, these are light and momentary troubles, as Paul puts it. So life is sad. Life is sad. There's so many losses. And yet, what are you going to do with your season? Do what John the Baptist did. Let Jesus become greater, we become less, so that when we go through the seasons, we can look ourselves in the mirror and we can say with confidence, with conviction, it's not about me. It's not about me. And I think a lot of us get in trouble and we get disoriented because we think it's about us.
Joe, how many calories do you think are in locusts? If you're tracking them on Noom.
I think this is your last podcast. Dan. I'm finding a new co-host.
Well,
I'm kidding.
I'm kidding.
You're welcome back for next week.
Oh, I was going to say this has been the final episode.
I don't know how to do any of the technical stuff, so you have to come back.
Oh, man. Well, this has been another episode of The Second Look. You can catch this sermon and our calorie calculation for Locusts and Honey at our website, cometoconnect.com. Have a great week.
You know what I hate? I hate that I'm pouring my heart out, and you're just sitting there waiting, biding your time, just to ask you that question. It's so wrong. It's so good, though. It's wrong and hilarious.